So today, as you can tell from the title, I'm going to talk about German propaganda, but specifically on German broadcast monitoring in the Second World War. There has recently been more interest in Allied monitoring in the literature, but not much has been written about Germany and Nazi Germany in particular. And I should start my clock, because there are rules, I'm told. Yes. And the literature that you have on German monitoring is really, it's dated, but it also focuses mostly on bureaucratic rivalries and Nazi personalities and how they were struggling to take control of it. My approach today is different in that I'm focusing on a specific set of documents from Josepha Goebbels' Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. And let's start by looking at one of these documents first, if I can manage to operate this wonderful PowerPoint. Yes. So here's an example. You can see that it's a list of something, and the heading says Die Lage in German, or the situation. And the document then lists themes or subjects to look out for in Allied broadcasting. The list was compiled by the so-called Erkundungsdienst, intelligence service, if you want to translate it, or basically something like the Propaganda Ministry's intelligence unit. And it was usually signed by Rudolf Stache, who was the head of the whole place. Yes. Aha, translations, always very good. It was addressed to a small group of people attached to the radio monitoring service called Sonderdienst Seehaus, something similar to BBC monitoring, so special service Seehaus, if you want to translate it. The set of documents that survives runs from October to December 1943. So what is interesting about these documents? We have to remember, of course, that radio was a fairly new medium at the time. It opened a vast amount of freely available information and didn't stop at borders. Radio monitoring, or the surveillance of radio stations in general, was about harvesting and analyzing this information for military, political, and propaganda purposes, open source intelligence, as we would say nowadays. The set of documents provide an idea, and I probably can get rid of those, provide an idea of what German propaganda ministry hoped to get out of this kind of intelligence, open source intelligence, at that moment in time. The documents represent fairly rare documentary evidence of the relationship, a very day-to-day, daily relationship between those who produce intelligence and those who consume it, and this in an autocratic or dictatorial even setting, regime at the time. So the question here is, how did the propaganda ministry direct the search for information they wanted out of the broadcasting space? Before exploring this question, a little context to understand the position of this intelligence unit within the propaganda ministry. And I'd like to make 2 points here and show a wonderful picture. So Propaganda Minister Goebbels was interested in how the audience perceived Nazi messages, of course. Domestically, he used the Domestic Intelligence Service, the Security Service, the SD for that. International broadcasting could tell him how Germany was perceived abroad, and Goebbels' diaries show how much attention he really spent to this kind of information from foreign broadcasting as well as from the foreign press. Second point here is Nazi propaganda's belief that propaganda relied on a set of techniques that anybody could employ, including Nazi Germany's enemies, and that could also influence the German population. So it was important to know what allies were broadcasting. But for this reason also, Goebbels thought that monitoring products, so distilling what the allies were saying about the war, for instance, was also dangerous material. The backbone of German propaganda, whatever you hear about how brilliant Goebbels was, the backbone was really censorship. This also applied to foreign broadcasts, and right at the start of the war, Goebbels introduced legislation that made listening to foreign broadcasts, foreign radio broadcasts, a crime. punishable by prison, labor camp, or even death. So even high Nazi officials needed special permits if their job required them to listen to foreign broadcasts. A logical consequence was that the products of monitoring services became highly classified, so secret information, within Germany, of course. While there were a few small German monitoring services in other ministries, the main foreign broadcasting monitoring service was run by the Foreign Ministry. And this is what the special service Seehaus was about. It was founded in 1940, and by 1942, it was roughly the same size as BBC monitoring, which is familiar to many of you, of course, and had about 500 employees, among them 120 monitors, and I think they monitored about 40 languages, in 40 foreign languages. Goebbels' suspicion, or he was very suspicious of the Seehaus monitoring service because it was run by the Foreign Ministry. He hated Ribbentrop, after all. And after some maneuvering, he got Hitler's agreement that the Seehaus was jointly run by the Foreign Ministry and the Propaganda Ministry. Goebbels also with Hitler's backing, curbed the distribution of Seehaus material because of the claims that it helped spread defeatism in the German army. So initially, when the war went well, basically, the Seehaus service produced reports very similar to BBC monitoring, a daily summary of foreign news. About 600 of these summaries were distributed in early 1941, and, albeit in fewer numbers, complete run of all the monitored news items, about 700 to 1,000 pages every day. In early 1942, however, Seehaus had to stop its production of daily summaries, and only 13 volumes containing everything that had been monitored were distributed. A further 50 to 90 numbers differed. Heavily censored material with nothing on the military situation or so-called atrocity propaganda were then distributed internally, mostly to news sections. So now to explain where the instructions come from. So the joint owners of the Seehaus service, Ribbentrop and Goebbels, were allowed to have their own units analyzing the material on the premises of the Seehaus itself. And these units informed ministers throughout the day. This is where the Erkundungsdienst, the intelligence unit, comes in. Because the radio intelligence unit became responsible for analyzing monitored material for the propaganda ministry. This included, most importantly, and I think I have another list here of the products they did, Minister Service Report, 8 to 10 pages long, that was passed to Goebbels and the members of his daily ministerial conferences. Moreover, a special report just for the eyes of Goebbels that was to include extreme foreign agitation and atrocity propaganda. Apart from the reports listed here, single items, about 150 to 200 per day, were telex or even telephoned to the propaganda ministry. So quite current and actual, quick, speedy work. Now, what about the content of these reports? In April 1942, general guidelines for the analysts in charge of the Minister Service were issued, and the guidelines stated that monitored material was to be searched for contradictions in Allied broadcasting. They should also highlight any changes in the Allies' so-called propaganda line, and the material then had to be produced in such a way that it could be used for counter-propaganda. The guidelines also stated that analysts had to follow constantly updated instructions from the radio intelligence unit, and these are the instructions that I showed at the very beginning and that I'm going to talk about now. Because when we look at the instructions, they did generally stress the search for material that really could be used in very pragmatic and practical terms in German propaganda. So there were straightforward requests like this one from March 1943 I have here, which basically reads, what does the opponent say about the situation in Northern Africa? Something that you would expect. But these straightforward or neutral requests were the exception. Instead, the requests really mostly included interpretations. And here are the first two items of instructions dated from, I think, 22nd of March, 1943. They refer to recent speeches made by Adolf Hitler and Winston Churchill. And if you read them here, the foreign commentators on the Führer's speech were very weak. Are there voices that indicate these reactions or new reactions? Churchill's speech was bland. Even the English commentators did not rate it highly. Are there any new reactions? So you see here immediately the kind of interpretation that is usually included in the request. The set of documents I'm talking about today covers crucial turning points of the war: German defeats in North Africa and the encirclement of the Sixth Army at Stalingrad. The instructions show how the propaganda ministries struggled to deal with these setbacks. The first defeats in Egypt were accompanied by a strict news clampdown that also affected monitoring. Broadcast analysis were only sent to high officials before they were even distributed even further. Stalingrad was another example. In the weeks before the encirclement of the army, the instructions either did not refer to the Eastern Front at all, or they did so in positive terms. When foreign news reported the encirclement, the instructions initially claimed that the opponents' reports were exaggerated, basically. After the High Command, the Wehrmacht's High Command, had acknowledged a setback at Stalingrad, the instructions mentioned the encirclement only once in 2 months. And when Stalingrad was mentioned later on, I think only 3 times, these mentions were sort of in a positive tone, claiming that the German lines were holding or that the Germans were even gaining ground. So here's what German monitors and the intelligence unit issued on the 18th of December, 1942. The military situation in the east is good. We gained territory north of Stalingrad. The report of the High Command will mention this. What does the opponent say? Admissions or attempts at denial are of interest. The silence in the internal instructions on Stalingrad reflected the public German propaganda line. And to downplay military setbacks, there were increasingly desperate-sounding requests for positive news. And these were made in almost all instructions from November 1942 onwards. They usually pointed to the successes of German U-boats, asking how the enemy broadcasts reacted to them. And these foreign voices, the instructions pointed out, were also to be presented as the most prominent item in the intelligence unit's reports. On several occasions, there were calls for any good news, military or otherwise. From January 1943 onwards, analysts also had to change the structure of their reports about the military situation. They used to start with the Eastern Front, but they were now to begin with the war at sea, pushing Eastern Front news to the middle of the report. Also, German propaganda changed its emphasis from focusing on concrete military events to concentrating on more general political themes. This is also reflected in the instructions that began to focus on stressing the danger of Bolshevism, and we heard about this in the previous panel, to Europe in February, and a vicious anti-Semitic campaign in April and May 1943. Just to illustrate this, there was practically no mentioning of anti-Semitism until 1943, but in April 1943, 65% of instructions mentioned it, and in May it was up to 96%. So almost every instruction was about trying to find something in this area. And here's one example. Arskios, first of claiming the German propaganda is pointing to the danger of Bolshevism has resonated strongly in the world. It is necessary to record all voices that condemn Bolshevism and that mention Bolshevist plans for conquest or atrocities. Good. There. So the following day, after this instruction, the instruction asked monitors and analysts to focus on recording and analyzing even the tiniest statement that could help the anti-Bolshevist campaign. You really have to keep it going after all, day after day. So a few concluding remarks. So a close look at the instructions shows that the propaganda ministry and the propaganda ministry's surveillance, really, of the international broadcast environment was, on the one hand, very targeted. It was mostly done to gain specific usable information to feed its own propaganda. When times were particularly difficult, positive news, usually about U-boat successes, were to be treated as top news items in intelligence units' reports. As the news from the battlefield became worse, German propaganda turned to more timeless, ideological topics. Campaigns to ignite fears of Bolshevism throughout Europe, in the wake of Stalingrad, for example, and later on the campaign to fuel anti-Semitism in Europe, were to be supported by sympathetic foreign voices. Underlying this effort was the belief that the abundance of information available in the world of international broadcasting could deliver this kind of information, so any kind of information that could support Germany's propaganda in Germany's favor. On the other hand, monitoring was a precarious business. The surveillance of foreign broadcasts exposed monitors and analysts to reports that ran counter to Nazi information policy and the Nazi worldview. It was dangerous material that could spread defeatism, even among the Nazi faithful who were working in the propaganda ministry. Therefore, the instructions constantly contained interpretations to remind everyone of the Nazi perspective. This was not only to keep analysts and monitors from becoming defeatists themselves, it also shaped the way reports were produced. The instructions indicated what kind of tone was expected and even which topics were to feature prominently in the reports. In other words, the intelligence unit tried to make sure that German monitoring helped shape the propaganda message from the ground up, beginning at the source. Thank you.
Thank you so much also for the discipline. The paper was very, very interesting. Now the next presenter is Vasily Prasenkov. Vasily Prasenkov is Associate Professor of Modern Bulgarian History in Konstantin Preslavsky University of Shumen. He earned his PhD in History in 2006 with a dissertation on the Bulgarian Agrarian National Union, Nikola Petkov, 1945-1947, and has since specialized in 20th century political history, particularly opposition movements and British-Bulgarian relations during the Cold War. He is the author of the two monographs, including Bulgarian and Great Britain before and in the beginning of the Cold War, Politics, Economy and Propaganda from 2011, and he published over 20 scholarly articles and book chapters. And today, Mr. Prasenkov will present a paper titled Planning Subversions, the British COE and the Attempt to Engineer Regime Changes in Bulgaria 1940-1941. The floor is yours.
And the place of Bulgaria in this war and attempts of the British COA to change some part of Bulgarian politics along with Bulgarian politicians. This case that combined foreign policy, intelligence, and some specifics of Bulgarian political situation. At the beginning of the war, Bulgaria was between the powers that took part in the war, and gradually the pressure on the country from Germany, from the Soviet Union, and from Great Britain gradually increased. The initial policy of Bulgaria was to stay aside from the war, to take a neutral position. However, Germany initially proposed Bulgaria to join the ASICS. Then the Soviet Union made another proposition, Bulgaria to sign an agreement with the Soviet Union, a pact for mutual support and understanding. And gradually Bulgarian king, Tsar Boris III, decided, along with the government, to orientate Bulgaria toward Nazi Germany. That was a tough decision. They didn't take this decision very easily. Their steps were closely observed from the British mission in Bulgaria. We can see some differences between the British diplomacy and the British intelligence. The British minister in Bulgaria, Sir George Randall, he advocated traditional diplomatic means to pursue Bulgaria, not joining the Six, while the British intelligence thought that decision had already taken, and proposed firm measures against this political orientation of Bulgaria, measures that included covert actions and sabotage. The following information is partly from Bulgarian sources and partly from sources of British intelligence and from the personal records of Julian Amory, who, like representative, who visited Bulgaria, like part of the COE, to pursue Bulgarian politicians about their politics and to find some people who are ready to collaborate with British intelligence. British intelligence had a network in Bulgaria from the 1920s. Usually there is a debate in the historiography about this network. Some people thought that British intelligence were completely unprepared for the situation on the Balkans. And in Bulgaria, other people had evidence that the British intelligence acted in Bulgaria long before the conspiracy or the group of Dr. Georgi Dimitrov, known as Gemeto or GM Dimitrov, for distinction between him and the communist leader Georgi Dimitrov. So these initial networks, Bulgarian police found 4 groups. They usually were Russian political immigrants in Bulgaria, and the British intelligence used them mainly for propaganda. They were aside from the network of GM Dimitrov. But in spite of that, they were crushed from Bulgarian police after the failure of the Dr. GM Dimitrov. Several periods you can find in the activities of COE in Bulgaria. In initial period, that is from the beginning of the war till the summer of 1940s, British intelligence mainly observed the situation in Bulgaria. They sent a mission from Belgrade with officer Colonel Bailey, who established contacts in Bulgaria and acted together with Norman Davis, who served like British press attaché in the British legation in Bulgaria. So the first activity showed that British intelligence relied on propaganda. Gradually, this measure were expanded to some covert operation. So, the events in Bulgaria in the summer of 1940s showed that the government and the king had firm intention to join Bulgaria to the ASEX. So the British intelligence decided to oppose this activity and to support some of traditional opponents of Bulgarian monarchy, such as agrarian leader, one of agrarian leader, because agrarians were divided on several wings, Dr. GM Dimitrov. GM Dimitrov was very positively described in the British document. Sorry. He was described as a democratic leader of one of the biggest political party, but in fact, agents of COE didn't restrict its actions to just to agrarian. They communicated with several political groups in Bulgaria. The first important person who agreed to associate with British was Lazar Popovsky, who was a Macedonian revolutionary with contacts with military leagues, communists, and of course agrarian, even contacts. He had contacts in the church. So with support of Lazar Popovsky, who worked with the British legation to publish the information bulletin of the legation, British intelligence service established contacts with Bulgarian politicians. So British COE observed three main groups of possible initial contacts, and we see this information from the reports of Julian Emery, who visited Bulgaria twice in 1940s, and also from the reports, I think, maybe written from Norman Davis, that kept in the United Kingdom National Archive, but we can see that British contacted the military league. In this period, military league didn't exist like united power, because it had been dissolved several years before this, because the biggest part of the officers were anti-monarchists. But the British contacted with a group that they called Velchevists. Velchevists were united around Colonel Damian Velchev, who was responsible for all coups in Bulgaria after the First War. Then they contacted one of the wings of the Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, so-called Protegorovists, but they were not very positive, both group military leagues, actually what left from the military groups and the Macedonians, because they wanted to act independently. Of course, communists were on the bottom of British interests because they were allies of our enemies, so they had a favorable policy in this initial period because of the union between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. They were not ready to act against the monarchy or to implement sabotage along with British intelligence. So COE considered that subversive activity were the way if the British wanted to convert Bulgaria from the union with Nazi Germany. The only group which decided to act together with British intelligence were agrarians along Dr. GM Dimitrov. Military League refused firmly both money and arms. Protegorovists accepted arms but not money. Agrarians agreed to get both from British. In the beginning of 1940s, a special person was sent to Bulgaria in a flat in Sofia to educated person that Geme Dimitrov showed that could act and implement sabotage in Bulgaria. This expert, that was expert for explosive, worked like a plumber in this apartment, and the British papers show that maybe that could raise suspicions in the neighbors because these apartments required great plumbing for several weeks. However, neighbors stayed calm, and the education continued successfully. But in these times, Bulgarian counterintelligence also came forth, and it infiltrated agents in the British legations who work like journalists. His name was Yuli Genov, and who worked together with Norman Davis for the publication of the Bulletin of the British Legation. Documents show that Norman Davis several times supported with money Yuri Genov to implement this propaganda, and he reported what communicated with Davis to the Bulgarian counterintelligence service. The biggest act that the group implemented was a bombing of a train that carried oil to the Germany. About 40 trucks were destroyed, and 7 people were killed. After this subversive activity, Genov contacted Davis and asked him if possible, maybe that was like provocation against Davis, and asked him if possible to support some way the British. Norman Davis told him that this is not necessary because they have special people for this operation. Maybe this is the suspicion of Bulgarian intelligence. And when Dr. G.M. Dimitrov decided to take the political actions, Bulgarian police acted very firmly and tried to arrest him. G.M. Dimitrov escaped with the British support, and in a truck of British legation who carried documents of the legation to Istanbul, he left Bulgaria. However, the networks of G.M. Dimitrov was under pressure, and several weeks after this escape, the British legation in Bulgaria evacuated because Bulgaria became the ally of Nazi Germany. After when British legation left Bulgaria, there was a bombing at the luxury Perapalace Hotel in Istanbul. Bulgarian claims that the bomb was caused from the explosives that British had to deliver to the network of G.M. Dimitrov, and actually this bomb was exploded in the hotel. Explosives were in the backs of the British legation, while Bulgarians and Germans claim that this is actually the reason for the bombing, while British claim that the reasons were activity of the Bulgarian intelligence along with the Germans. In the several weeks, the Bulgarian police crashed all networks of GM Dimitrov and the British CEO. Documents show that British intelligence delivered to Bulgarian agrarians several millions leva, that in equivalent of today money is about 300,000 pounds. British pounds. So in April, gradually police crashed the networks because agrarians were not very cautious with documents and explosive and radio station that they get from the British COE. Initially, Bulgarian police find political manifest of Dr. GM Dimitrov, and in one of associate of Dr. GM Dimitrov, they found also explosives. So they gradually found 38 people and took them in trials. In the end of the years, some of them were accused in absentia, like Norman Davis and Dr. GM Dimitrov. So after the fail of this conspiracy, British intelligence hadn't presence in Bulgaria for about 2 years to the mid of 1942, when they started to support Bulgarian communist partisan movement. So this case is also a success of Bulgarian counterintelligence that successfully discovered all actions, and this is also confirmed that Bulgarian agrarians were not good conspirators, because they very easily were discovered from Bulgarian police, and maybe the denial of Colonel Damian Velchev to support the British network showed that there were not very big chances for any success in Bulgaria in this period. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. And the panel will conclude with the presentation, but Dr. Matteo Burcio, he's a postdoctoral researcher at the, I'm not very good in Spanish, I don't know very well, so sorry for my mistake. He's a postdoctoral researcher at the Escuela Española de Historia Arqueología en Roma, part of the Spanish National Research Council. His current research focuses on the history of modern Italy and intelligence services, and also approached from comparative perspective. And today, Dr. Burcio will present a paper about Game of Shadows in a Fragile Country, Disinformation in Cold War Italy. The floor is yours.
First of all, many thanks to the organizing committee, Elżbieta, Vladislav, Thomas, for this opportunity. It's a very pleasure to be here, such a wonderful city and prestigious conference. So, in my presentation, I will provide a brief overview of some disinformation activities conducted within the Italian Republic during the Cold War. During the Cold War, Italy was a key theater, right in the middle of the Mediterranean, sort of crossroads between the Western and Eastern Europe. Italy's 200-kilometer border with Yugoslavia placed the country at the forefront of the Iron Curtain. And furthermore, the Italian Communist Party was the second most powerful political movement in Italy, and the largest communist party in Western Europe. So this meant that the division between the so-called free world and the Soviet bloc was also present on Italian soil, not just at its borders. It was a sort of fifth column problem, which threatened to overturn Italy's international alignment. And keep in mind that the Italian state was a relatively young state. It was established in 1861, so it was a kind of fragile institution, like Fernand Braudel pointed out, talking about the insigne faiblesse, the notable weakness of Italian state. The fragmentation and polycentrism of the Italian intelligence community was already evident during the fascist period and persisted in post-war Italy. The backbone of Italian intelligence services was the agency of the Ministry of Defense, the military intelligence, and the agency of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, both of which underwent frequent reorganization. It is important to note that it was not until the establishment of the Servizio Informazioni Forze Armate, SIFAR, in 1949, that Rome saw the restoration of a competent foreign intelligence service, which also dealt with counter-espionage. The connection with the military world was crystal clear. The officers were usually recruited from the army or the Carabinieri, National Gendarmerie. The director was an army general and was directly dependent on the chief of defense staff, the highest ranking officer serving in the armed forces. This was not the only peculiar feature. SIFAR was not established through a parliamentary initiative, but rather through a circular, an administrative act signed by the Ministry of Defense, Randolfo Pacciardi. This circumstance should come as no surprise, since in Italy, although there was a regime of parliamentary democracy, the major opposition force, the Italian Communist Party, PCE, was a strategic adversary, strategic opponent, and was bound to remain far from the work of reshaping the state apparatus after the Second World War. Exploring the history of Italian military intelligence agencies, specifically SIFAR, then SID, then SISMI, is quite challenging. Most documents related to these agencies remain classified at present time. So we can say almost nothing about their operations in Italy and abroad. And there is limited open source material available. Press coverage of intelligence-related issues was poor. But in the 60s, the situation changed. In 1967, two prominent leftist journalists, Lino Iannuzzi and Eugenio Scalfari, uncovered an alleged coup attempt known as the Piano Solo, an anti-communist plot that was reportedly orchestrated years earlier by the head of state, President Antonio Segni, with assistance from Giovanni De Lorenzo, the former director of the military secret service, SIFAR, who was the chief of staff of the Italian army then, later. Allegedly, the plot was named Solo, which means alone, only in Italian, because it was supposed to be directed only by the Carabinieri, National Gendarmerie. This scandal had a snowball effect, discrediting one of the most influential figures within Italy's security apparatus. De Lorenzo was forced to resign. However, the judiciary found no wrongdoing in SIFAR's activities or in relation to General De Lorenzo and sentenced Scalfari and Iannuzzi, the authors of the scoop, to prison for criminal libel. They managed to avoid prison thanks to parliamentary immunity offered by the Italian Socialist Party. And the Parliamentary Commission, which reviewed all the proceedings from various inquiries and trials, concluded its investigation by ruling out any attempt at a coup. It was a major public scandal that negatively affected Seefar's public image for decades, undermining its legitimacy in the public's eyes. In 2001, a former KGB colonel, Leonid Kolosov, claimed that he himself provided the journalists with false information with the help of an Italian lawyer, Pasquale Schiano, who was a Soviet agent. And Lino Iannuzzi himself, one of the authors of this scoop, admitted he was manipulated by the KGB. So it's quite possible that Seefar fell victim to Soviet disinformation. In the 60s and in the 70s, like I mentioned, Seefar and its successor Sid struggled to overcome public distrust. In contrast, throughout the same period, the officers overseeing the domestic intelligence agency, which operated under the Ministry of the Interior, managed to remain out of the public spotlight. Actually, the powerful Ufficio Affari Riservati, Office of Confidential Matters, was not even a formal intelligence agency, but it was involved in counter-espionage and the use of false information for covert operations. The head of this office was Federico Umberto D'Amato, a cynical yet experienced officer. He had crucial connections with the CIA. James Jesus Angleton, Theodore Shackley were among his close friends. He maintained an international profile. He was the mastermind behind the creation of the Club de Berne, an intelligence sharing alliance among the major European countries. D'Amato was a weird man. He was a fussy eater who collected 18th century animated puppets, as an interview with the BBC in 1992 revealed. We can see D'Amato here in this picture with handling a puppet of politics, the jongleur. Under D'Amato's leadership, the Office of Confidential Matters successfully infiltrated all major political parties and extremist movements in Italy. It was motivated by a radical anti-communist agenda and also engaged in sophisticated disinformation campaigns. And now we have primary sources about that. Among the leading actors of far-left terrorism in Italy was Gian Giacomo Feltrinelli, this one, with moustache and glasses. He was an influential businessman and publisher who advocated guerrilla activity across the country and had strong international connections. You can see him with Fidel Castro in this picture. And he was a significant target for Federico Umberto D'Amato, who secretly commissioned the writing of a book entitled Feltrinelli, il guerrigliero impotente, published anonymously, but which enjoyed moderate circulation in the early 70s, in which Feltrinelli was described as a rich, frustrated man who used his money to send naive young people to their deaths without ever getting his hands dirty himself. The cause of this attitude, according to the libel, was to be found in his sexual impotence. The book sought to influence Feltrinelli's psychology in an even more subtle way, insinuating that he was, in fact, nothing less than an agent provocateur in the pay of the CIA, since it was argued a true guerrilla leader, if he is in good faith, never sends his comrades alone into battle. The attempt in this case was to delegitimize the guerrilla leader in his supporters' eyes and put pressure on him, push him. And in the end, he escalated. Feltrinelli was found dead near an electricity pylon in 1972. Another disinformation campaign orchestrated by D'Amato involved the Chinese posters in the mid-60s. During this time, numerous posters praising the Chinese Revolution and Mao Zedong began appearing on the walls of Rome and other Italian cities. These were reportedly put up by a self-styled Maoist movement that claimed to have a widespread pro-Chinese network throughout Italy and aimed to incite subversion. However, it has since been revealed, with the admission of those involved, that a group of neo-fascists was behind the distribution of the posters. The order for this operation came from the Office of Confidential Matters, which sought to undermine the Italian Communist Party by creating chaos among leftist militants. Conversely, the Office of Confidential Matters took a more lenient stance towards neo-fascist groups. Various investigations indicate that its officers intentionally misled inquiries, police investigations, to obstruct the identification of a far-right group responsible for the bombings in Milan, 1969, Piazza Fontana bombing, and Brescia, 1974, strage Piazza della Loggia, which resulted in several civilian casualties. This was part of an attempt to destabilize public order in order to maintain political stability. And in both instances, the office led by D'Amato deliberately spread disinformation about the perpetrators, falsely attributing the attacks to the anarchist movement, despite being aware that the actual culprits were the fascist group Ordine Nuovo, New Order. So the activities of the Office of Confidential Matters, which went mostly unnoticed during the Cold War, came to public attention after D'Amato's death in 1996. This revelation was possible by the efforts of the Public Prosecutor's Office and a couple of state archivists who uncovered one of the archives of the Office of Confidential Matters stored in a warehouse in Rome, in precarious conditions, on the outskirts of Rome. And inside the archive, evidence of the bombings, such as a fuse, was found, and it was hidden from the judiciary in the previous years. So now we can now partially identify the office informants, like Ante Yerkov, learn about some of its operations, as I mentioned. It may seem overly simplistic to describe this as a form of a revenge of historical research against disinformation. So I would prefer to conclude my speech, my presentation, with the words of an Italian writer, Ennio Flaiano, which fit well with the Italian case, but may also apply to other countries. Thank you for your attention.